Okay, everybody. Andrea, let me know if you can't hear me online. We're ready to start. We have quite a few people online already, so we're good. Yes. So we have 18 so people online as well. We will try to be as interactive as we can. I have a couple announcements. We do have a couple of people who were able to attend. So Jeff, who has been moderating this for quite a few years, he had a family emergency, is not going to be able to moderate. So I'm going to say a few things, get us going, and moderate this or host the event today. And Jeremy, who, not just me, Jeremy Hagel from the Kansas City Fed, was also not able to make it this year. So we've adjusted the schedule. But we still have plenty of stuff we'll use the whole time up. I give you a time to ask questions and also to get in a little bit more detail. So I already know we maybe have some questions from you guys getting into some population and some other stuff. A couple housekeeping. I think everyone knows where the bathrooms are. They're out to my right, your left, depending on how you're sitting, all the way down the hallway. Definitely put your phones on vibrate, but I love social media. You use hashtag KSECon. You're welcome to do that on LinkedIn or Twitter. We're good with that. And I'll even engage you again later so you get your phones ready, start tweeting out stuff. There's a lot of people who can't make it, right? And there's other groups that they would like this information, but there's not their core things, right? We've had teachers here before that want this information. So you sending it out to other people is very useful. And your perspectives of the economy, which can be different from any of the speakers, is also useful. So definitely be engaged. Tell people what you see or what you think is happening. You can go to our website to download the presentations today. You go to cdbr.org, you go to the events, and you can look for Dodge, and you should be able to download all the PowerPoints. You can even do screenshots to do social media. I keep hinting at social media, do it. Let's see. Yeah, use KSECon to do that. Special thank you to our sponsors. We have several sponsors. We don't receive any more state funding at all. We had in the past to come out here, so we need the sponsors to be able to put this on. And the ticket price does not cover costs of all the costs that we do to put this together and travel. So big thank you to our sponsors. Evergy is our lead sponsor. We're very appreciative, and they're sponsoring all of our events. We also have Kansas Health Foundation. Actually, a special shout out to them. Kansas Health Foundation not only supported this, but they also supported our population forecasts. And they've also supported when we do the transfer of wealth study, which your community foundations here as well will call us regularly, trying to figure out where wealth is coming to help improve your local community. So they've helped us quite a bit. The Helgersons has helped us also a bit for all of ours. They helped print some of our banners and things like that for us. So we're very appreciative that cuts down costs, our signage, to thank sponsors. Also on here, the Dodge City Ford County Economic Development. We have a whole bunch of you here. And Joanne Knight has been great from the very beginning. I had this discussion before I even came out here about let's have discussions with your business community and leaders around this area to get them engaged in dialogue about the economy. And so she's been very supportive from the very beginning of trying to engage. So I thank you for that, and thank you for bringing people out every time. So that's great. That's my sponsorships. We are trying to do as much to keep everyone safe and healthy. For masks, whenever you're done eating, you can put it on, move around, definitely put it back on, so we try to keep everyone as healthy and safe as possible. Well, here's our KSECon. Oh, this one, yes. How many people have stocks? Do stock markets invest? Hopefully everyone, right? There we go. You're all investors. You're all engaged in the stock market. If you want to, you can go to this website and do your forecast for the stock market next year. We're going to use this, gather all the information up, and we'll have a consensus of people of what they think. And we will post that. We've been doing that for the last couple of years. If you happen to get the closest to it, and you'll be surprised, you can put all kinds of answers out there and someone will get really close to it. Then we will give you a free ticket to our big event in Wichita to come out there. So, and the one in Wichita, we usually have over 750 people in attendance and bring in national speakers. So this last year we had some really good national speakers. A lot of fun. All right, I already told you that Jeff is not going to be here, so I'm going to host it. I don't think I have any other initial comments to share to get us going, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into my presentation. All right, for the state outlook. Back to this. I told you I was going to lead you in. Hopefully I saw some of you getting your phones for your hashtags, right? I was thinking, what are all the favorite hashtags of 2020? And there's quite a few. My favorite hashtag is doom scrolling. How many people have done it? Oh, come on, you all have done it. Put your hands up. We want more interaction than that. I know you've done it. Do you even know you've done it? All right. If you went on your phone, probably this morning, scrolled for the next doomsday news, because it's happening every day, that's doom scrolling. Now put your hands up if you've done it. Oh, come on, I know you all have done it. There we go. I asked my 2 teenagers their favorite hashtag this year. One said quarantine, which is kind of funny, and the other one said maskne, which is mask acne. So the teenagers are definitely feeling it too. So if you think of one, there are plenty of econ ones, extra points for that. I'll try to retweet that. All right, I've always done this. What is our outlook from last year? And last year I said the Kansas economy is going to grow about 0.6%. You're like, what was I thinking when I said that? Matter of fact, most of last year I was thinking about when the next recession was going to be. I put a whole recession indicator section on my page. I did a survey to businesses, and actually the majority of businesses said we're going to have a recession in 2020. However, no one knew what it was going to be. Actually, that was on my slide. I said, we'll never know what it is. But I asked people in this room, what do you think is going to be? And I don't think I had anyone from this group give me a suggestion. But there are some people who gave great ideas, but no one came up with COVID. My theme last year was a health checkup, right? I said, what's the vital signs? So were you here? Did you hear that? The health checkup last year? We're trying to figure all the vital signs. Are we doing well? And really, I still stick to it. We had the fundamentals behind us. We didn't have them back in 16 and 15. The Kansas was actually pretty weak around that time. But we were doing a lot better in late 17, getting into 18 and 19. We were doing so much better. I thought we had a lot more improvement to grow, really to catch up to where the U.S. was going. So I thought we would finally see some really solid growth. Obviously, that didn't happen. So the question is, what's my theme this year? Any guesses? Well, I could only think of one thing. A Shakespearean tragedy, right? And every Shakespearean tragedy has 5 acts. So I broke my presentation up into 5 different sections. And the first one I put is supernatural forces. And if you think about it, if you think of Shakespeare, supernatural forces, you think Macbeth, right? They have witches. You think about Hamlet, they have ghosts. And 2020 has, oh, come on, you can be more interactive than this. Let's get the energy up a little bit more. You had some calories in there, your sugar's up, right? COVID, right? That's our supernatural force. And I did this because we did all that doom scrolling, right? I think it's important to say how much of that was really true and get a perspective, right? We heard about those hard hit sectors. And so the first one on here is to come back to the hard hit sectors. And if January was 100% and you move forward all the way to April, this tells you where that employment dropped to. So if you look at the hardest hit, leisure and hospitality was 100% in January, dropped down to 51%. That means you lost 49% of leisure and hospitality, right? That's eating out, right? It was very obvious. We did a shutdown and that slowed that down significantly. You keep moving it forward and it's moved back up to like 76. Now, I put this out because you'll see there's shifts in the economy, right? The economy continues to change. There's during the shutdown period and more today. And today, other sectors are seeing the demand not being as strong as it was before, and they're now doing more layoffs than they had before. One that you see on here is do we have any bankers in the room? That's strange. We always have a banker in the room. Anyway, the finance side, and there's a reason why. They are the ones that had very little layoffs at all because they were too busy doing PPP loans and refinancing home mortgages that even if you did try to lay them off, they wouldn't even know because they were busy working late nights trying to get them all done. All right. I wanted to show, because we get in those doom scrolling, we heard some really bad news about segments of the population that got hurt really bad. And unfortunately, there are a lot of truths to it. For example, women were more likely to be hurt. Minorities were more likely to be hurt, and those people less education. Well, why? It's actually, if you move back to the previous slide, those hard hit sectors, women, minorities, and lower education used to be more likely to be in that hard hit sectors, and that's why they're more likely to be hit hard here. I don't know really to weave this in, but one thing when you look in the labor market, there are some issues going on deeper with this labor market for women. Matter of fact, one of the successes of the labor market over the last several decades is entrance of women into the labor market, building skills and adding a lot of value to it. If you look at labor participation today, it is reverted all the way back to where it was for women, all the way back to the 1988. So there are deeper issues in the labor market there. Now, post-COVID, there are some concerns, particularly if you have this teleworking world. How many people have teleworked at all? Some, right? You had some of you. Some of you doing telework. You also have this urban de-densification. That's not just something happening in New York, although you've heard the stories in New York and California. It's happening in Kansas City, Wichita, where people are moving out, right? You also have this automation forcing. We're looking at those jobs and saying there's too risky. We're just going to replace it with more technology, right? If that happens, all those professional services that tend to really come in those more urban areas and downtown, even downtown here, you have the professional services. If more people are working from home, that means you have less demand for administrative assistants and security guards and leisure and hospitality, some hotel workers. And even in here, if you have less demand for those, could be an issue because that tends to be those jobs that people do, why they go and get more education, and you have upward mobility in those. So there's concerns, right? Particularly when you look at the previous slide, right, or this slide of where those people will move up in the labor market in future years. But if you think about Shakespeare, one thing about it is when you start the play to the end of the play, the environment always changes. And that's exactly what's happening in the labor market today. It is dynamically changing. We were not going to look like what we did in January going forward. And I'm actually going to give you a counter argument where I think we might actually have more upward mobility, even though it feels right now where we're really destroying some of these very hard hit sectors and some people are being hurt really hard right now. All right, I think this one is so interesting. If I asked if incomes went up in the second quarter of this year, I doubt anyone would say yes. But incomes not only went up, it skyrocketed in the second quarter of this year. And I want you to notice my scale has not been fooled around or touched at all. That is a zero scale. So what in the world happened? How did income go up so high? I only showed you a couple of the components because these are the ones that had the biggest part of it. The first one is wages, right? Earned wages, wage income that you got from your employer. It went down. It makes it look like it went down a little, but it went down a whole lot. We had a lot of lost wages during that time period. The real effect here is transfer of payments. What is that? That is the unemployment insurance from the federal government and state government flowing back into the market to hit those hard hit jobs. Those people laid off in those other sectors, they had unemployment insurance that picked up and gave them that income. That's what shifted, right? Now, the unemployment insurance, you can talk to economists, it doesn't matter if a Republican or Democrat, this is the most effective and efficient way of stabilizing an economy, right? It gets out the quickest, the most fair way to get it. Now, we could disagree about the $600 of the federal government. That was pretty high. There's a lot of concerns. I'll come back to that later. But itself, it's very efficient and effective. Now, what happened during this period? We didn't need all this cash, right? Actually, this kept the economy up. People stayed home because they were teleworking. The savings rate just bloomed up. We had so much more cash during this period of time. Unemployment insurance dropped in July, and people were running out of those benefits. So if you were thinking in the summer, things are starting to feel a little better because we're done with the lockdown or feeling a little bit better, it's because all the cash was really out there. People were still spending in those sectors that were hard hit. We go into the fall, people were now spending down the savings rates, supporting these jobs that are hard hit. But those savings rates are starting to be depleted. So my picture, if I show this by monthly, you can already see the GDP is dropping, right, because of income. Income's going down because we lost this. The economy is heavily propped up by this federal government. And when the Federal Reserve came out a couple weeks said it is critical that we do it, they're looking at the velocity of money. Cash just going around the economy, supporting these other sectors, and that's drying up, right? There's less cash and it's slowing down. So that's why it's very critical for a stimulus package. And I will say, when I created this a few weeks ago, I was thinking we're still on track to still stimulus package, and I thought that was my underlying assumption. It was critical for it to happen. And now I didn't look at this morning necessarily, but that is coming down further. And the longer you wait, it's going to create some more problems. It'll create a lot of uncertainty in the market. So getting it done quickly will shore it up and keep consumers happy. waiting longer could actually put more damage to the economy. If you're going to do it, you might as well do it now. This is what I'm trying to get at. Yes. Go ahead. Just say hashtag with each word and you're good. Yep. Yep.
Conversation that I have received, the people comments that I have received are having all of the stimulus monies that have already been issued. So why have another one for all of the current stimulus dollars?
Sure. So in the stimulus, there was the CARES Act. We're going to say broader to the CARES Act. Unemployment insurance increase, that we had PPP loans, we had other funding that went to state and local governments. By the way, there's a lot of risk in state and local. We got some city people that there's some real risks of spending coming back there, and that hasn't been all utilized. But there's a lot of risk in state and local government there. And then there's other hard hit sectors, some ones like the aviation, but I think that's all been spent on that one. I don't know where it all hasn't been spent. My real concern is the effectiveness and efficiency of the unemployment insurance, right? We're getting to the point where we're seeing layoffs. You see unemployment coming down, but we also see the labor force decreasing, women exiting the labor market because they have to stay home because of kids or health issues or things like that, taking care of someone. And then we're seeing less spending, and then that's starting to dry up. So I think it's more the unemployment benefits. We could have a longer discussion about how effective all the other ones going forward, another PPP loans. In reality, I'll give you my real short answer. I don't think all of that is necessarily needed for the economy to go forward. Unemployment insurance, I think, is needed going forward, but that's not how policy is made, right? So the policy's got all these other factors to it. So I think we do need the stimulus in there. I don't think it necessarily needs to even be as high as either party is wanting it right now, to be honest with you. But I think we need some stabilizing factors. And there are some sectors, since you asked, we're getting into this, there are some sectors like manufacturing that is critical going forward. I mean, manufacturing in Kansas is struggling today, where all these other companies are starting to feel relief and they're moving forward. There are deeper issues. So a more specialized funding going back to like manufacturing where it was needed, that could be very effective today. Yeah, it should be much more targeted funding because, and I've had those conversations, a lot of that money was used and it wasn't really needed to some of them. They were just spent some of the money because they had it, which is fine because it actually got cash into the economy and kept it propped up. I don't think that would be as effective. When we come back and look at this, the first round, we might discern that PPP loans were effective enough to keep people employed, and the other funding they used to construction kept money in the economy. If we do another round, we probably see a less of a yield for that dollar. For every dollar you put in, it's probably gonna be a lot less, unless it's highly targeted to those people who are really struggling. So, very good. Overall impact. How hard has COVID hit Kansas? Well, on the employment side, I've got news for you. It's a lot less than the US. And it's actually, I'll be honest, a lot less than I expected. We were asked back in April, what would the impact be? And I thought on the employment side, because I really did it from the output side, how much we produce, I thought we were going to lose about 10.2% at the state level and much higher for the manufacturing towns. I thought it was going to be a hard hit. So I was wrong, sort of. I'm going to show you why I think I'm actually kind of right. But I'm wrong, sort of. Why? First one, going back to the PPP loans, I had to make a simple assumption that we're going to get the same number per business as the whole rest of the nation. And I was wrong. We got a lot more. And there's a couple of reasons. We had hard-hit industries, and we had very effective small and medium bankers that got it out there much more efficiently. So if you want to see that data, I can show you in another slide. Another one is stimulus checks. I assumed we get the same amount as everyone else. We got a lot more. Well, that PPP loans helped hold on to more jobs than I anticipated. So that was a good news there. Another one is we were much more financially capitalized, companies were, than the rest of the nation. So they had cash on hand to weather the storm a little bit better than the nation, which I'll show you later. And a third one, when I did a panel and asked businesses, they said, at the nation, they had marginal workers, people they could let go and it really wouldn't matter to their business. we were much tighter in the labor market. I can't let that person go. And so they used their cash to hold onto that critical labor. And that's the decision, was it effective or not? So at the end of the day, we let less people off today. Now you can see the nation let more people off, and they're actually recovering more now. But you can see Kansas kind of staying flat because we're seeing more layoffs. We did much more furloughs, and now we're seeing those furloughs come back and being the rolling layoffs. By the way, we did similar thing back in 2008. The U.S. let more people off than us, and then we kept laying people off for a few years later. We were holding on to that labor as best as we could. All right, when are we going to recover from this? This is not my forecast. I like this good judgment. These are people who get paid for accuracy, and they're not necessarily experts. They're out there always looking, right? They're trying to get this. There's an update since then, and they say, we're not going to get a dissemination and a vaccine. It's now at 48% expected by the end of this school year, and it's actually now another 48% expected by the beginning of next school year. So you've got at least all the way through this school year before we're going to have a vaccine, probably through the summer into the next school year before we're going to have a real solution. Unfortunately, that messes all forecasts up. It's from the political side or from COVID. That's the driving factors here that's going on. And I can't really get all into them, but I'll give you some insights. So that's going to hold us down. Yep.
On the horizontal axis, that's not when the vaccine will be available. That's when this survey was done. And the colors represent when.
Yes. Yes, perfect. Yes. So they're doing it every day. This group every day come in and post their ideas, and they're looking at all the news, every single company, where they are in the testing, how are we getting approvals from the federal government, and they're changing their probabilities. That's what you see on that axis on the bottom. And
almost half think that we'll have the vaccine distributed sometime between October and March 21st.
so yes. So,
and then about 80% or even higher think it'll be before September 2021.
Yeah, or later, because this is April 22 or later. So it could be longer.
No. Have the yellow and black.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So now I just gave you I think it's right around 48% and 48%. So that leaves just 4% remaining that would be after. So we think it's going to happen this next year. Just win this next year. So we have a long ways to get through it. Okay. Act 1, we're talking about supernatural forces. One thing about Shakespeare, he never lets the supernatural force to be the main theme, right? It's always used to tease out the character flaw of our hero, right? Think about Macbeth, right? There's a character flaw in the hero, and they use the supernatural forces to understand it. I think this is actually very useful in understanding the labor market today, right? There are issues within the labor market, and they're being exposed today. So what I want to do is come back and say, how has COVID exposed some of those issues in our character flaw? Everyone likes unemployment rates. I actually don't like them, particularly in Kansas. I don't think it's useful because of a different reason, which I'll get into later. But if you look at unemployment rates for the US, it was up to 14.7%. It dropped to 8.4%, right? We laid off 22 million people, hired back 11 million people. So by definition, yes, the labor market, we're hiring people back, but there's still people available for work, right? Here's a different lens of looking at the labor market, and I think this is very interesting, is looking at unemployment claims, initial ones, and dividing it by per 1,000 workers in that sector. So if you look up at construction all the way back in January, so for 1,000 construction workers in January, off season, right, there was only 5.6 people who filed initial unemployment claims. That first month right there in January is a sign of a very tight labor market. It doesn't matter where sector you're in. There wasn't people laying anyone off at all. I mean, even for construction, that's not even layoff. That's a weak season, right? That's not a layoff. There wasn't labor available. You move forward to the peak, for 1,000 manufacturing workers, there was almost 85 people who had initial unemployment claims at the end of March. You come down here, and that hard hit sector, a combination of food service, for 1,000 workers, there's almost 93 people who were initial unemployment claims just that week, right? So this shows you a higher level. That's a different labor market. And I say that because when we think COVID, we feel like we're under the same rules, but the rules, it keeps changing. One, because of political shutdowns and things like that. And two, the labor market's just changing. Businesses are finding demand shifted, right, or weaker than they expected. You move forward, I'm going to call it today, but that we have more recent data now. You can look at the most recent data, you can see a very different labor market, right? Those sectors that were hurt before, they still could be hurt, and we're getting unemployment claims, but it's now spilling over to many other sectors, right? That's where you're starting to see these other unemployment claims. If I broke this down even more detailed, you see even more detail of these other sectors are now where we're seeing those unemployment claims. Furloughed before, now laid off today. If we move forward to January of this year, it's going to be different again. I think you shouldn't think it's all the same labor market. And if you're actively looking for people to work for your company, you're going to have to be very dynamic in trying to find them. Here's another way. Here's makes it more personal, looking at those issues of our labor market in Kansas. Initial unemployment claims for gender, they're both really high back at the peak. And today, men are coming up higher. Why? That's the influence of manufacturing in Kansas. Manufacturing is doing those layoffs now. You come down here, under race, it was a minority, just broader minority issue at the national level. It's more of one race that's being impacted in Kansas, and that's black. Other minority tends to have high skills and education in Kansas, and they're being less impacted in the state. You go over on the right side, and this more defines the uniqueness that's going on. People later in their career and people with more education is who's being laid off, being proportionally laid off more today than other sectors. So if you're an employer saying, and out here we talked about these really skilled issues, if you're an employer saying, I need a skilled labor, there's labor out there that's skilled later in their career, but they're still out there, and they're more available today than they were before. Oops. All right, the census had these surveys of households. Yes? So when we get to skilled, it gets really complex, right? And I actually did that in that February book. Did you guys, if you attended last year, you got the complement to this and to try to get some of a skill perspective. And as I shared that, and I didn't come here to talk about it, and I won't talk about it this morning, I'm sorry. But go back and look at the book. I have one example if you want to come up here and look at the cheat sheet on there. I only used education. And education's great for skills, right? If you get bachelor's and above, but that doesn't really define skills in Kansas, right? Particularly here, you can have people who have gone through trade schools that have lots of skills, and that could be of value too. So when you say my definition, for Kansas and for this region, you should look at people who've had any kind of technical training as well, and there could be a lot more value in that segment. And unfortunately, I don't have that measured. And honestly, if you go further than that, it's actually skills and abilities is what has more value. So if we compare Kansas to the nation, and people ask me all this regularly, it is so difficult to compare us to like South Carolina and Alabama and Georgia. We have all these competitions with them, right? They'll say on paper we look the same, but if you have an employer here that has an employer in one of those states, they're going to, sorry for your Alabama comment there, you're going to say the skills are very different. Knowledge and abilities are different here than there. And that gets into some skills, but they're not measurable, right? The employers know there's a big difference between the quality of workforce here and skills, even in this area, than it is somewhere else. Did I help answer that? I went a roundabout. Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm going to come back to that. I have pushed on this one. So, well, let me tease it up a little bit. And I've said this to you guys before. And if you back up last year, or the year before, when we were in the tight labor market, and you were tight before that, but I realized we're really getting tight in the whole state, and you had competition from here to other markets where people were really, you needed labor, and it was really hard for the higher skilled, and they had a certificate or higher, some experience or a bachelor's degree. In these areas like here, that was super hard to get, right? If you back up the last few years, my answer is it really wasn't a problem of you not having skilled labor or getting access to it. It was a problem of wage. Why? Because when I showed this to you guys in previous years, Wages in Kansas, if you took out inflation, was declining, and the nation was going up for several years. So if we really had a skilled and a labor shortage problem, we would have raised wages, and that would have been the signal to hire them up, right? So my pushback is saying that we really have a problem of getting people was really we had a problem of increasing wages, particularly when I know profits were going up. But profits were going up in a lot of these sectors, but our wages weren't going up. So we really didn't have a labor shortage problem. We had a wage problem. We weren't willing to attract that skilled labor here. But it's different today, which I'll push back again on that one. And you could disagree, by the way, but I'm just telling you fundamentally that wages would be my first signal. We didn't have to because we had a whole bunch of excess labor in the market. And so companies were used to had all the power, and they were being able to keep that wage down. And when you look at your neighbors, it's like, well, I'm paying better than them, right? Well, that competition wasn't fierce enough to get that wage up like it was doing on the national level until just recently. Wages are really coming up in Kansas. All right, they did a survey of households, and they looked at depression, and they looked at anxiety and finances. The short story, because I want to cut a little bit here to get back on track, is that Kansas was not impacted as hard on the household side as the nation on almost everything. There's one item out here that I thought was interesting because we had a lot more of those layoffs or furloughs, and we had the layoffs. Those people had food scarcity was actually much higher in Kansas when they were often not without food. That's a community problem. You're talking about public services and getting access and crime and issues. There's a community problem with that. Matter of fact, it is broken up in even more detail that families and churches were not supporting those people with food securities here in Kansas than it was at the national level. It was coming through defined organizations that were supporting them, not through family and friends. All right, I told you I didn't like unemployment. I do like an unemployment rate. I do like the employment population ratio. And this tells me, because you can't hide, if you get discouraged and you leave the labor market, and this is a problem in Kansas, they'll leave the labor market and know, hey, I'm in this small town. I know I can't get a job because they're not hiring right now. They just laid off. I don't even need to look for a job. I have enough money in the family that I'm going to stay unemployed without even looking. Well, the unemployment rate drops, says everything's great, but they're actually out there and they could be employed. This employment population ratio dropped a lot more than the nation in 2018. The nation kept improving. We were flat. We were just now coming back up. I like this one because it tells us right now we could be a lot closer to that 52 in all the markets, even rest of Kansas. We could get back up to where we were before. We have people out there who are not employed, right, that are available. So this is pushing back again. There are people out there. Where are they? Especially if you look at the Wichita market, for example, it's already down way before. It's closer to 46. It could have actually moved higher. There are people that weren't even out there looking for jobs, although unemployment rate was looking low. So why? This gets back to it. I did this conversations with businesses, and they said, I have a job I can't get anyone to apply for, or I apply, have it out there, and there's no one qualified for that job. But you're telling people there are unemployed people out there? On the other side, you have households, and you probably know someone who got laid off, who is actively out there putting their application out every day and not getting a job. So the overall, you see that force, they're not matching today. The question is, why are they not matching? A lot of people are saying, well, it's the unemployment benefits, that $600 from the federal government. They got all these households, they're just rent-seeking, trying to get that free dollar, right? But in that case, economists have already kind of looked at the underlying variables, and that's not the holistic view. I don't think there's so much fear in the market that people were actively looking for the job, right? By the way, I did the analysis of that 600 plus our state benefits way back when it came out, and 78% of all Kansans were better off on unemployment insurance than they were working. It really had a lot of fear on what that would do. The answer is actually a little bit easier. The answer is just, it was such a shock to the labor market that the labor market hasn't resorted itself out, right? There is labor supply. There are people who are unemployed who want to work. There's demand for jobs. It just doesn't fit within Dodge County or a region or an industry. And you shuffle the labor market that much, guess what's going to happen? It's going to take a while for that labor market to heal. The reason why Wichita was so low, we laid off jobs that would never come back. We had signals of when where new jobs would be. They had to take training to get them into it. And it takes years to recover some of those things, right? That's why Wichita was still not back to 52 from what happened to aerospace. This was even more massive than what happened even just in one local market. This is across the whole nation and in these regions. So the issue of matching a labor is just going to take time, right? Employers have to know when the economy is going to really improve before they say, I'm ready for this job. They find they can't find anyone to increase that wage. And then to tell someone in the household, you need to go get training. They have to get trained and then do that match. It's just going to take a lot of time for that to work out. All right, when you look around the state, there really is two stories. There are the urban communities that lost more employment and coming back, and then there are more rural areas that are already back to zero or growing. Matter of fact, if you remember last year about some of the skilled labor, I was sharing that migration or people moving to jobs back to rural areas. Do you remember that? So those people were here. You saw that not in large numbers, but people were finding more better opportunity because wages were finally coming up in rural areas. People were moving to it. Well, you're seeing that probably right now. That's probably those people got laid off in more of those urban parts of the state are saying, wait, I can now get that job over here and it could still be effective for my family. Maybe they didn't even have to move. They could just still work for you. And so I think that's why some of the more rural areas are picking up. Plus food was doing better, the food manufacturing. So there was demand for it. All right, Act 3, the economy of good and evil. If you think about Shakespeare and you think about what happened with that supernatural forces affecting Macbeth, for example, he started off as really good and it just kept wearing him out and then he became evil, right? What I'm worried about is what will COVID do to those great sectors and industries that we have in Kansas. After a long period of time, some of these great sectors could really have a lot of issues underneath them and they could really start suffering and start going bankrupt. So this first slide, I know this breaks all the rules of the number of numbers I can put on a slide, the number of words I can put on a slide, but it was so beautiful, I did it anyway. On here, you can see the highest impacted sectors all the way to the top. This is for Kansas, it's for employment. And on the left side of this, the left half of it, it's just year over year employment. And you can see going forward, you hit all of a sudden in April, it drops. Arts, entertainment, recreation, 51% in the state. Right? And then year over year is still negative, right? So it's hard hit sectors. But another way to look at it is the month over month. That same arts entertainment, you hit April, it dropped 50% month over month, but every month after it kept growing. They took this big hit and they're finding where that demand is. Remember I kept telling you demand shifted? Look at the losses when you go down this level, right? They might not be the hardest hit originally, but now you're seeing those employment being laid off in other sectors, right? That's where we have some of that bigger concern. All right, remember I talked about the impact of COVID on Kansas, and I said the employment I might actually have been more right than I said before. This is output. This is how we value all the goods and services. The US economy declined by 31% in second quarter. Kansas declined by 30.3%. So if I just did output per worker, I would be a lot closer to that 10.2% than I expected, right? So we held on to jobs because we felt we had to, right? We held on to them even though we lost a lot of output, a lot of sales going into the economy. I was actually right. I said manufacturing, unlike the nation, manufacturing could be hit really hard. And actually, it's even worse if I go to durable manufacturing versus non-durable. Non-durable is doing really good, right? Healthcare, I knew we were going to lose a lot in healthcare. The story here is the nation wasn't hit as hard in that manufacturing. They're not dealing with trade issues, just-in-time issues. Just-in-time was the golden for just-in-time is a disruptive to a lot of these manufacturing stoppages in production. They can't get resources to actually produce or use the labor, right? This is what we're struggling with right now, right? Because of that, because down globally, nationally, I think that our durable manufacturing is going to take a lot longer to come out than it is the nation when it was just more of those food services, things like that. It's going to be a lot harder. When we get back to very pinpointed, targeted sectors, that's why I'm thinking manufacturing is one that needs it more than some of these other ones. All right, they did a survey for businesses. And on the business side, when they did a survey, the good news by establishments, they said businesses in Kansas weren't impacted as much as the nation. If we weighted it for some of that manufacturing, it might be a little higher, but at the overall establishments is lower. And here's some of the finance numbers that show that we were doing better, we were better capitalized, ready for it more than the nation. Now I took this information, plus us holding onto that labor and said, if when I did talk to the businesses, said, it doesn't make sense. Why didn't you just lay more people off? Right? It just doesn't make sense. And why don't you take your money and make big investments right now to really change the direction of your company? We know the market changed. And the businesses said, they weren't like Macbeth, who was overly ambitious. They said, no, no, no. I needed those labor. I understand the risk. I understand we don't have a clear outcome in the next couple days or a year or the next few months, but I'm going to make small bets and I'm going to hold on to labor because I need them, or if I don't have them, I'm going to struggle to get them back. And then when it comes back, then I'm going to make investments, right? So we have a very different perspective than Macbeth, for example, being overly ambitious. We're very conservative on how we're looking at this. I asked them questions about the finances. They said, yes, volume dropped. Volume will come up for some, but not for all the businesses. They said that prices are going to be a big issue for those when in manufacturing. There's increasing prices. It's really going to slow them down. Their ability to charge more for the product to the final customer, everyone said, that's just not going to happen. We're not going to increase prices. There's no way the market can handle it. And so what's going to happen to the companies? They're going to have decreased profits, right? It's going to be very hard for companies, right? They've had really good profit margins before, great revenues, but that just shrank down, and that's going to be It's going to be tough. All right, our forecast, unfortunately, this doesn't even help us this year. Usually I can look at an industry like agriculture or manufacturing and tell you a story, but we're showing broad growth. Even on the table on the right, I can show you growth in some or decline in some. The reality is you could have a business sector I think is going to grow, but they made one small financial choice or even a large financial choice that got them caught off guard and they're going to go bankrupt, right? So the real issue now is not really the industry, it is micro level. So on the economic, understanding those companies is going to be very important. Getting them to have real stories about how they're doing. Do they have access to capital, working capital? Where do they need to make the next investment is going to be the key part. The bankers being part of this too, of the story of solving this problem. Is going to be very localized on each individual one because this is just a hit sector thing. It could be anywhere that it's going to struggle this next year. All right, fate and fortune. Shakespeare has this idea of this predestination, but the hero gets to decide where they want to go, right? And I already showed you that heroes, our businesses were much more conservative. They were not ambitious. They already have a decision where they're going, and they're doing it differently than the nation. I was surprised by this. This gets back to this wage thing. When I asked about increasing wages, and I'm surprised at how many said they're going to increase wages this next year, right? Last year I was hiring that higher skilled one, someone with more education or more experience or even technical, right? It was technical on the manufacturing side. Whatever the definition, it was more skilled. This year it shifted, right? Remember I told you earlier there's a shift and there could be some upward mobility. They said, no, now I'm looking for medium and lower skilled jobs that I'm going to increase their wages because I need them to move forward and it helps me to remain competitive. And I'm going to do a little bit more training for them. That's where I see a big shift in the labor market. This is going to keep their costs lower and be able to move forward, right? Our forecast, because we're losing some higher income wage jobs, which is not great for the overall state, but we have some upward mobility opportunities. Our forecast for wages is flat. It looks like our forecast for retail sales is strong, but keep in mind, we were really weak in Kansas there for most of this period where the US was just going straight up, right? We are already pretty weak. This is pent up demand. This is even the very conservative Kansans who said, I'm going to wait until after this election. I'm going to wait until after whatever president is on board in January, and I'm going to start spending then is what I think is going to happen, right? They're going to hold their cash, and we're going to see that bump up maybe in the second quarter of this next year. Before we buy those things that we really need, we're just putting them off until we get to that point. Get some more certainty underneath us. All right, expectations, businesses, most of them are saying they're going to hold, right? But you can see some are going to decline this next year, and a few are going to have new opportunities because of COVID. Our forecast is the widest I've ever presented, and it's because of COVID itself and political forces. There's two really wild variables in here. And both of my forecasts that I'm going to tell you, they both require a federal stimulus. I really think that has to happen. So on the bottom scenario, if you think about this, we still have some, consumers were feeling pretty good, but we're starting to lose our mojo lately. We're starting to get a little bit more concerned about the economy. Let's say we go through this election and it really gets us concerned and we start stopping, and that when we stop spending, that's going to really trickle down even further, right? We may not get a federal stimulus right away, right? That's going to hold us back. We don't have a real solution under COVID, maybe not even the spring, it goes all the way to the summer. In that scenario, our Kansas economy with a lot of negative sentiment and concerns about COVID, we're lucky to be flat from where we're at now, which we bounced back, but we're going to be flat for this next year. That's my forecast. The other side of this, however, is we get past the presidential election and we have stimulus, cash keeps flowing through the economy, right? That's a positive thing. We get a better outcome, a vaccine, and we can move on and the cash keeps moving, right? In that scenario, we could jump a lot faster, closer to 1.1% growth, right? I think it could be a lot stronger. What I'm showing you is right in the middle of both, that 0.5, really growing the second quarter on the employment. The right side is this cumulative effect, right? We won't be back to where we were in January, but we shouldn't expect to be, right? It's going to improve, but I wanted to give you two views of that. All right, the last section, the paradox of disappointment. And Shakespeare loves to do one thing of human nature. We have this thing called hope that we love so much, and he holds it out there and just crushes it. And that gives us this enjoyment, thinking it's so much fun because it's essential to us. But now I won't really crush your hope here. I will say that out of all the presentations I ever get asked, everyone says, what recession does this look like most? There really is not one, but I will share one that I think is interesting because of the structure of the economy. And that's all the way back to the Black Plague, right? In the Black Plague, they lost a lot more lives than us, right? In some places, half the population died. They shuttered the economy a lot more. But what was the structure of the economy in that period? That is a feudal system. They had kings that had all the power. If you wanted to be a cobbler, you had to inherit from your great-great-great-great-grandfather, right? That's the only way to move up. You couldn't move up any other way. Well, when half the population was removed, the cobbler said, I need someone, a farmhand, to come over. And they were willing to do training. That was the upward mobility. And wages increased, one of the highest in history, right? And it actually came to for a 100-year period, one of the highest level of income equality and a growing economy after the Black Plague. Why do I say that? What's our conversation that we've had the last couple decades? We had a decreasing income inequality where the middle class has been hollowed out, right? There's been less upward mobility issues. I see the shift in this labor market, not as extreme as the Black Plague, but I see some shifts, right? We have these large companies that were getting bigger, and we had the smaller and medium companies that just weren't as engaged and didn't even have the opportunity to be engaged. I think that's going to shift as well, where there's some more opportunity in the middle and smaller businesses to create those businesses right now, who give the opportunity for that lower skilled or middle skilled and do that training, and they can move up and grow in the economy. So one example of this doesn't even get to entrepreneurs. All those entrepreneurs out there right now who had the value of their houses went up, right? They have assets, they have money to put into it. They actually maybe had stimulus checks. They got unemployed. They said, I could do this better. I have cash now. I could be working on my next innovation. Doesn't even include them. This is just applications. Even applications with planned wages is up. And so I see this as an opportunity where we're going to see a little bit more of that innovation that we've really missed out in the last decade. Another one is productivity. You think about this. We were talking about this lack of productivity for this last decade, right? We had all this technology, we weren't really using it. I think now that we have all this new technology, all this software, we're putting this into place. If we keep this, if people become more productive, particularly that middle skilled and that low skilled person, their value just increases. You can just pay them more because they're more productive, right? That gives a new opportunity to grow, right? I think that's going to happen as well. So here's my last silver lining here. Teleworking. I've talked to so many businesses and some of them said it just, I'm not sure I really want it. Some actually say they like it. I actually love it, by the way. I've really planned on staying home. I really like it a lot. But let's rethink about this teleworking. What was the issue that we had in this market of getting access to labor? Working just opens up labor within your market. People with disabilities, people who have transportation issues, right? They might have a DUI and they can't get to work and now you can't employ them. Well, if they're in a different skill, they can now be employed teleworking. Guess about regional markets. You can now hire someone who lives in Hayes, who's not ready to really move down here, but they can start working for you. They have the skill to work for you. If you have changed your market and you can do teleworking, you can just now open up. Opening that up also helps you get a better price for the wage that you're paying them, right? Because you're now competing with a larger labor market than local, right? There's a lot more strengths in this. Removal of rules and laws. The best example is this telehealth. You can now be at home and talk to your doctor and they get paid. But think about all the rules you had within your company. Soon as we had the COVID, all those rules just went out the window. We realized we didn't need all these rules. This is beneficial to those medium and small businesses that say, I can reduce all this cost. I can be much more nimble than a large company, and I can find a new market, right? We know the market's changed. Customers change, preferences change. Let's get those costs down, get the labor, and the smaller businesses have the ability to move faster than the larger companies. Last one, and already led this up for the business productivity. We had all the software that we weren't using. Now we implemented it. Some businesses are like laying off on it. Keep that data in there, keep that productivity. We have more value, and that has that upward mobility I was talking about. If I was gonna, I don't even know where I'm at on time. Kind of, I'm the moderator and both. I can't keep track. If I were going to say one thing, I think next year is going to be difficult. But ad astra per aspera, I think is the best thing I could say at this point. As we move forward, it's going to be difficult, but it's part of our nature in Kansas to move forward. Oh, there, look, I'm doing really good. So I got a few minutes for questions. Yes.
As I watch this community, and I agree, there are positives as far as workforce.
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing is increased mental
Yeah.
health issues. And we are not created to be in isolation. We're created to be relationships and so forth. And so how does that factor into the economic picture as far as increased costs for mental health issues, and whether it be the abuse that we're experiencing, the alcoholism, the suicide attempts, because our numbers are up on suicide attempts and so forth, because of that isolation, and some of that, not all of it is caused by telecommuting, I get that, but it gets back to that isolation thing.
So for those people online, because we have quite a few people online, the question was kind of answered itself a little bit in there. You kind of know where we're going with this, but the question was this teleworking, right? It is put a pressure on people when they're isolated, and then it creates depression and anxiety, and that has led to, as he was putting it, crime and suicides and a few other factors to this, right? Alcoholism, things like that. But does it really separate the teleworking for just as what's happening with COVID, right? You could still be very engaged with people if it was not COVID, right? And still do teleworking, right? People were doing teleworking before, and they could still be engaged in their social groups and things like that. So I would separate the two. I think you're right. The part I think you were kind of self-answering, we are human nature, and we require people to be around people, and it's, the faster that we can get out, but that's based on a vaccine and dissemination, to really get that socialization to improve. Another factor, which you may be hinting at as well, there's some issues for, as a business owner, if everyone's teleworking, you lose the value of them just having casual conversations, right? Right. There's another aspect that might hurt going forward. I will say, things will adapt, right? It might not be 100% teleworking, but someone could still work over in Hayes and then come down once a month and have those more casual conversations to overcome it, right? You can still do teleworking and still not be self-isolated, I think. But those are my thoughts, but you might have a different thought. Yes, Stan?
Conversations that I have is that, broadly speaking, they don't like the remote. One area where I had to say, wow, this really worked well for us was on mortgage loan processing. And I had 2 or 3 different places say they never could have gotten through the deluge of applications that they had over this summer if they weren't having people able to work remotely, and they actually were more efficient. But that was the exception of their operations, not the standard. So it does depend on what is the job function. A mortgage loan processor is very much about contacting externally, checking, making sure all the boxes are checked, not as much about interpersonal interrelationships with other employees at the company.
I created a massive data set that's on our website way back when we were just seeing COVID. The question that came to us was, if we look at all these occupations, what occupations require you to be physically present to do it? And what jobs require you to be with another person? And the opposite question is, what jobs don't require you to do that? So I have all occupations for Kansas, and I have it compared to very detailed. I mean, there's 500 some sectors or 500 some occupations. If you want to look at it, go to our website and say, hey, I have this occupation. How do we compare to the nation? And what is the real requirement of being physically present to do their job and in person, right? And if it's less, there's some opportunities where you can say, hey, maybe they can be productive. They don't really need to be here. Give you a thought on there. And it's actually broken out. If you want into more detail, I have that data that could be done for, unfortunately, it just says rest of Kansas outside of the MSAs, the way they measure it. I have it in detail for Topeka, Wichita, Kansas City, but then it's like the rest of the state. But if you want to know more detail on that. All right, is there another question? Andrea, you can, if someone's online, they can send a text or put in the chat box, and Andrea can send me a text message. Is there another question in here about population or housing, or not? I don't want to get on the housing side, but the population side? So let me put a question to you guys about, and this is a discussion that are coming out, how many people are coming into your community because of this opportunity? Maybe they want to be further away from someone else. Maybe they could work here. How is that this opportunity for this market? What do you know about that? Maybe they don't want to be in you know, a more urban area, but they can come back, or they already had property and they just work here more. Yes, Nick? For those people online, Nick said that there's been a lot more prospects coming from California and other places looking at this market, and there's been several this week.
Our two handicaps are housing and high-speed connectivity. The high-speed connectivity we're addressing right now with CARES funds and so forth faster than we're addressing the housing.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's wanting to relocate, we're way behind on what's needed for housing.
Mm-hmm. And Sam will talk more about the housing. We were going to have Jeremy Higgle here from Kansas City Fed talking about that broadband. I know he's been out in this area for other conversations. I think he was in this area. But you should definitely reach out to the Kansas City Fed. He is really being engaged in that broadband discussion. He had some really good insights that he had on broadband and how to get in the markets and how to think about it. Where, you know, I don't know what parts have DSL still. He was talking about how DSL is just not satisfactory, and put some good characterization to the need to that market and how to improve it.
Jeremy, on the broadband discussion, one of the things I've noticed in this area that you don't necessarily see in other parts of the state of Kansas is there's 3 or 4 companies that are all laying fiber lines right next to one another. So instead of going into those areas that don't have it, they're basically laying a line right next to an existing line that can provide the same service. So there's no regulation by the state government to say, okay, you're servicing this area, you know, and instead of having Cox, United, and Apple, and these other startups, basically laying, you know, 4 or 5 fiber lines that are running for 150, 200 miles right beside one another, rather than say, let's go start getting into these urban areas. And then even these individual companies, they'll run a new high-speed line because they say, oh, we want to connect businesses in your community. Well, they have two lines that can do the exact same thing, run on the same poles. It doesn't make any sense for me. There's not enough money being put into the infrastructure to try to connect the homes and spread out your network. And the answer I always keep getting is, we just can't provide service to your area because it's too costly. Well, and there's no grants available.
We've actually did the on the telephone, the Universal Service Fund, and looked quite a bit for several years. We've been asked to do it, and even got some. Didn't necessarily win all the national attention. Again, got national attention when we were looking at how does Universal Fund for phones and then getting an internet goes back to these communities. So we've looked at it quite a bit, and there's a sector where there's some unnecessarily national regulation and state regulations that came on board that is really what preventing the companies to make it competitive, right? In some cases, they're looking at this market. If it's just one looking at this market, they say, well, it's not financially feasible. I've heard that story, and there's some great models where they say that it's not. And there's some great models where a community went and did it and made it financially feasible for them just to build it. But in some states you can't. I don't know where we're at completely in Kansas to do it on your own. But in the other point, then you have competition that further complicates it, right? They say, well, it's not financially feasible because I already have split this market with someone else, and it costs too much to not only lay it, but then to replace it, because they have to replace that technology. I don't remember the exact number, but it's like every 3 years, they're having to replace almost all of that. So it's not just the initial setup costs for a lot of that. It's looking at that market, saying it's split with more than one competitor, and then saying, I just can't make it work, even in a market like here, right? It gets more complex. But regulations has a lot to do with that. I've read through some of that, and it's preventing a lot of that potential opportunity within states or within communities because there's just too many barriers.
I know the grant side of things, you look at wireless and broadband for the city, Dodge City with Paris, and so forth. It got to the point where, our small communities have high-speed internet, and they have it from one provider, and it's much more cost. But that's not provided in our areas either. Starting to get you've done Hayes, but of course they got like $50-60 million grant from the federal government.
I would recommend reaching out to Jeremy Heigl. He had some really good information, and then he engaged with communities all in the 10th district trying to solve the problem. With this, I'm going to turn this over to Mykel. She's from Kansas State, and I've always really appreciated her insights in agriculture. I always a great presentation. So I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you.
Ready to go?
Okay. Hold on. This on?
It is on.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Good morning. Well, no, afternoon, right? Where are we? Thank you for having me out today. And I am associate professor at K-State in the Department of Agricultural Economics. I work mostly in extension, so my job is not teaching students on campus, it's working with farmers, lenders, agribusiness folks around the state. And so I get a lot of my my anecdotal stories from visiting with farmers. So, some of them are more colorful than I can share with you today. But we'll go forward. And how many of you have or work with the agricultural industry in terms of farmers as your clientele, right? Okay, so ag is huge in Southwest Kansas. It's a big driver of the economy. Why do I care about agricultural land values? What does a farmer need in order to farm? Okay, yes. Here's the deal. I ask a question, you guys answer. Got it? Okay. All right. I heard two things and they're both right. They need land and they need Water. Okay. This will be on the test, absolutely. So they need land, and with that, water rights, yes. And so we're going to look at land values because land is the #1 asset that a farmer holds. And so the health of the farm economy is borne out in those land values and their willingness to bid for land. So we follow the farm economy, but if you follow land values, you'll get a real good sense of what's going on in the farm economy, and it'll help you kind of understand what the drivers are. So that's where this presentation is coming from. But we'll start with looking at profitability in the ag sector over the last 20 years. And this comes from Kansas Farm Management Association data, and the KFMA is an association that's statewide, and what they do is they collect farmers' data from farmer members, and they put it in a big database, and then we're able to look at the profitability by crop enterprise. And so this is looking at wheat, corn, beans, and milo, and I want to break this down into a couple of different time periods. And the first time period is 2000 to 2007. And what we have here is farmers on average breaking even or losing a little bit of money on their farming enterprise, okay? And I'm gonna call those the normal years. Why would I call those the normal years? Well, because farming is a highly competitive industry. And when we have profits, we bid them away. And so breaking even on average is actually pretty good because these are economic rents, or economic profits. So I have accounted for returns to owned assets like machinery, and returns to labor, and returns to management. But look at this period from 2008 through about 2013, 2014. The average farmer was making $50 an acre after they paid all of their expenses and everything. What do farmers spend their money on when they've got money to spend? Equipment and buying more land. That's right. And I had one farmer try to tell me that he spent it on his wife, and I called bullshit. Okay? So farmers spend it on machinery, they spend it on land. So what do you think was going on with land values during a period like this? Everybody's got profits in their pocket. What are they doing? They're outbidding each other. Have any of you ever been to a land auction? And what do they like to do? They like to outbid each other, right? I'm not going to let so-and-so across the road get that piece of land. So we saw land values going up here, and this included, and I'll talk about it a little bit, but rents. So not just buying land, but renting land. We also were bidding up the price of rental rates, okay? So that's what was going on that period. Then all of a sudden, we went from making money to losing money. There was no in-between. We didn't go back to normal. We went to losing $75 to $100 an acre. Now, farmers are eternal optimists, right? They keep farming year after year thinking things are going to get better, but we've had a pretty bad run. And you may have noticed this in some of your clientele, is that they've tightened up on what they spend their money on because they're in this situation where cash flows are negative. And then the last year I'll show you is this year right here, which actually looks like kind of a normal year. There's some profitability on a couple of our crops and some losses on another one. So what's been different in the last year or two? And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. This is net farm and ranch income. What I can tell you here, let's see if I can get my clicker to work, is that the green bars show you profitability to the dryland crop side. Okay, so from 2010, 11, 12, and 13, even down to 14, we were still making pretty good money. We were well above $100,000 in net farm and ranch income. And when I ask a K-State student and I say, would you like to have a job that makes you $130,000 a year? And they say, yes. I'm like, well, what if that same job made you $6,500 the very next year? That was your profit. They're less likely to say yes. And then I ask them, well, how many of you are going back to the farm? Oh, well, I am, right? A lot of risk in this sector, a lot of risk. If I was in the cow-calf side, this was the year to sell it all and get out. Cow prices were incredibly high. Cattle prices were high. We made a ton of money that year. And then things dropped right off. as they always do. The cure for high prices is high prices. Okay? Oh, I'm sorry. I want to point out that the last 2 years on the crop side have looked actually pretty good. We're back around $100,000 net farm and ranch income in 18 and 19, but I'm going to show you why here in just a minute. This is the variability in net farm income by region of the state. When I look across the state at farm budgets, my cost of production is not that terribly different, right? We're all running the same equipment. We're all buying the same seed. My prices that I receive for my commodity are roughly the same because I'm not selling in a differentiated market. So what drives the variability in net farm income? Okay. Okay, yes. Say it louder. Weather. I love coming out to Western Kansas and going to a farmer meeting and getting a rain gauge. It's so optimistic. Right? Weather. Weather drives variability. You can do everything right, and if you have a bad weather year, your profitability is going to be low. Or if you have a good weather year, things are going to be great. Yes, sir. Oh, don't give away the story yet. Just wait. Here we go. Total net farm income broken down by farm income, the revenue we receive from selling our commodity, which is the orange, and government payments, which is the blue. Great question, okay? I just wasn't quite ready for you. 2014, we made most of our money from selling crops. 2015, we made most of our money from government payments. And that's been the story ever since, especially with 18 and 19, which I'll point out to you, the red dot, I was trying to show proportionally how much of the government payments were coming from the MFP program versus Farm Bill. So we pass a Farm Bill every 5 or 6 years, and in that Farm Bill, there are government programs that pay farmers when we have bad revenue years or when we have low yielding years. So we are still getting those payments, and they come every year and they're variable. But it's the MFP payments that have made a huge difference over the last couple of years, 18 and 19. They're called the market facilitation payments, and it's the Trump administration's payment to farmers to try to make them whole again after the trade wars with China. Okay? So we have a trade war with China. China knows that farmers supported Trump. So what is their tactic for making it hurt Trump? Well, we're going to cut our ag trade. We're going to cut back how much we buy from you in terms of soybeans. So this is what was going on there. And those MFP payments are the reason that we've made it back up to $100,000 net farm income in 18 and 19. Now in 2020, we're going to see payments based off of the response to COVID. So we're going to have another year of getting a lot of government payments to support what's going on. Do you see where farmers could be very interested in the outcome of the presidential election? Absolutely. What's going to happen next year, 2021, if we don't have those government payments? This is the distribution of farms across the state in terms of their profitability. I'll go back to some of your comments about efficiency, size of operation, management skills. There's a lot of things that drive profitability in the ag sector that when you're talking about differentiating across farms, right? Not all farms are created equal despite the fact that they operate in a highly competitive environment. What I want to point out to you is we have this group that's making negative profitability. That's 18% of my farms. If I take on the next group, which is 0 to 50,000, that group is about 40 to 45% of my farms. 40 to 45% of my farms are making less than 50K. Why does that matter? Because farm family living expenses are right at about $70,000 to $73,000. So 45% of my farms over the last 2 or 3 years have been unable to cover family living expenses. What do you do when you can't cover family living expenses with what you make off the farm? You go get another job in town, right? And what's the most important thing that you can get off of that job besides a paycheck? Health insurance. Absolutely. Health insurance is the fastest growing category of farm family living expenses over the last 10 years. Okay? So that's the situation that we're in. Why do I talk about rental rates? Well, because the average farm in Kansas is made up of a land base that is 60% owned and 40% rented. Okay? Renting land by farmers is a very common practice. And in fact, they do it because it would be damn near impossible to buy all the land that they need to farm to have the capital to be able to do that. They need to be able to rent land, okay? So who do we rent land from? Retired farmers. That's a big category, absolutely. Or their wives. Or their grandchildren who live where? Yes. And I have a newspaper article from, I believe it was either Hayes or Hutch, I can't remember now, I think it was Hutch, from the teens, bemoaning the state of landowners and how they all lived in town and they didn't know anything about farming. And we were having to deal with these people. And I thought it was hilarious because here we are 100 years later and we're bemoaning the state of the fact that we have all of these landowners that don't know anything about farming and we have to deal with them. And it's a perpetual issue. But yes, landowners are comprised of a lot of retired farmers and a lot of people who have inherited land, okay? So we have to work with them to negotiate for lower rents. And the trick here is that for farmers, and you talk to lenders especially, and they'll say, well, we need to go negotiate for lower rents. How do we do that? Well, we have to talk to our landowner and we have to talk about the state of the farm economy. And for any of you that work with farmers, how forthcoming are they with their finances? They hold things very close to their chest when it comes to their finances. So to tell them, yes, you need to be communicating, you need to be telling them what's going on so that you can negotiate a lower rent, that's tricky. Here's cash rents, and what I'll show you is the way that they have gone up from 2007 at the beginning of the boom period where we averaged statewide $40 an acre for non-irrigated cropland, and it went all the way up to $60 an acre by 2015. Okay, that's a pretty big increase in rental rates. Have they fallen off with the new profitability situation? No. Why? There's still value there. I still need that land. I need to be able to farm that land. If I let it go, here's quote, if I let that land go, I will never get it back again. And that's probably true. It doesn't mean that there isn't other land to get, but it's hard. It's hard to get in with those landowners. You build a relationship. We have people who have rented from one generation to the next for 4 or 5 generations. You don't just break into those situations. Working in extension, we're always doing meetings. And so meetings like this, right, for farmers. And we were trying to come up with the name of the meeting that we were going to do here about 3, 4 years ago. And the name of the meeting, what I wanted to call it was, how long can I afford to lose money on rented ground? But I didn't think anybody would show up. So we retitled it. Here is, and this is a little tough to see, but Ford County is at $35.50 an acre per year for non-irrigated ground. Gray is at $45 and Finney County is at $38. You can see there's a lot of variability across the state in terms of what people are willing to pay for ground, okay? And it has to do with productivity of that ground. And on the non-irrigated side, it has to do with how much rainfall we have. On the pasture side, we see the same thing, okay? a lot of variability where you get to the eastern side of the state in the Flint Hills and you have more ability to pay for that ground. But we track these rental rates because they're a really important aspect of what's going on in the sector. So let's talk about land value trends. Land values. Do we buy land thinking we're going to turn around and sell it next year? Like in the housing market, there are people that flip houses, right? Do we flip farmland? No. When you get a hold of a piece of ground, the idea in your mind is, I'm going to turn around and sell this. I'm going to leave this to my kids because I want my kids to farm it, even if your kids don't want to farm it, right? We have very long-run expectations in mind. We know that when a certain piece of ground comes up for sale, that piece that Grandpa tried to get and he couldn't, we have an obligation to try to get that ground. So sometimes we're not thinking in terms of current profitability situations, we're thinking in terms of that long-run expectation. So land values do reflect those long-run optimism in the sector. We do have information on land values from USDA, and I'm going to show you those values, and then I'm going to show you values that we estimate from actual sales transactions, okay? So this is Kansas. We're at $2,080 for a statewide non-irrigated land value. That is, for 2020, that is down 3.7% from 2019. And I'll show you the long run trend in the values here in just a minute on another chart. So we're down from 2019. On pasture, we're down 1.4% with a statewide average value of about $1,370. Here's what land values have done over the last several years. Right? That run up that we expected because of the profitability in the sector happened. Okay? How many of you track or are aware of the situation with regard to property taxes? Okay. We'll talk about property taxes real briefly here. Are property taxes based off of land values? No, they're not. They're based off of an 8-year average of an 8-year average, which is actually 15 years. And it takes into account the profitability during that sector. Not the land values themselves, but the profitability driving it. Okay. If I have a 15-year span, what an 8-year average of an 8-year average does is it actually weights the years in the middle heavier than the years in the tail. Okay, and the idea is that the values themselves will change very slowly so that no landowner is caught with a big increase or decrease in their sales taxes, and planners are not caught with a big increase or decrease in revenues. It all works really well, except a situation like this, where land values went way up because profitability went way up in a hurry. And what is happening right now is that distribution of weights around the sales or around the property taxes is heavily weighting those really good profitability years and lightly weighting those poor profitability years. And my question to you as a human being is, when you're making a lot of money, do you save it with the anticipation that you're going to need that money in a couple of years? Hell no. What do we do with it? We spend it. So we made the money to cover the taxes that are having now, but we didn't necessarily save it. This is the rent to land value ratio. This is what landowners look at in terms of the rent that they expect to get versus the land value. And we were bidding land up so high that it was pushing the rent to land value ratio down. Rental rates weren't changing fast enough. Even though they were going up, they weren't changing fast enough. So we used to, about 10, 12 years ago, have a 5 to 6% rate of return on non-irrigated cropland statewide. We don't get those kind of numbers anymore. All right, so let's talk about market-based land values. So those USDA numbers are based on surveys. And if I were to do a survey of this room, would I get the same answer from any of you? No. It's a survey, right? It's your opinion. Well, when it comes to land values, if you haven't been participating in the market by buying and selling land, you may not have a very good idea of what that land is worth. So what I really want to do is talk to somebody that's been involved in the land market, or better yet, look at actual transactions, actual land sales, and estimate a model that will tell me what that land is worth. So we got market transaction data from the Property Valuation Department in Topeka, which is part of the Department of Revenue. These are the folks that collect the data from all the county courthouses, okay? And what they do is they give me a data dump of data from 2015 through 2019 of actual sales of agricultural land, coded agricultural land. And I get to look at the following. I get to look at what county that land is located in. So I can control in my model for things like population density. If we're talking about Sedgwick County and we're talking about ag land selling in Sedgwick County, is there the potential for non-ag influence on land value? Yes, right? For some of the counties out in southwest Kansas, is there the potential for non-ag? It's pretty low. Now, some parts of the state, population density doesn't do it. It doesn't explain it because the non-ag influencers are actually coming from things like hunting, okay? And hunting isn't necessarily reflective of the population density close by. It can be reflective of demand coming from out of state. Oil and gas is another non-ag influencer, okay? Acres in the sale. How big of a tract are we talking about? We were in Emporia last week. I drove past a sign as I was driving into Lyon County. It said 311 acres for sale, selling in 2 tracts. Why do they sell in 2 tracts? Right, you can sell each individual tract for more. It's a smaller tract. You actually have more bidders for a smaller tract of land because the amount of total money that you got to come up with is less. But on a per acre basis, it will actually increase the price. And auctioneers get what? Commissions, yeah. So that's how they're going to split up land. So we want to look at that. We want to look at the mix of irrigated, non-irrigated pasture in each parcel, okay, because that's going to affect its sale price. We want to look at 20-year average rainfall for that parcel. Enrollment in government programs like CRP, where we set aside that ground and we get government payment for not farming it. We need to know about that kind of stuff. We want to know the value of improvement so we can remove it and have a bare land value. And then I get rid of parcels under 40 acres because even though they're in ag, if they're less than 40 acres, it's possible that they might get converted to a non-ag use. And that might be why they were bought. So I keep it under the larger tracts. Okay, before I show you the results, I just want to talk for a minute about how many actual transactions we've had. And in 2015, we had over 3,500 transactions. The very next year, 2016, we had just over 2,000 transactions. Now, 2015 was the first year of bad profitability. 2015 was that first really bad year. But I think everybody thought, oh, it's just one bad year. We're going to recover. It's going to be fine. And so the 2015 sales went forward. 2016, though, we saw land for actual bids on ground were significantly lower than what they had been. And so there are a lot of folks who said, you know what, I don't have to sell right now. I'm not going to. So we saw a lot of no sales at auctions where the last bid was not sufficient to get the land to sell. And we saw a lot of land put up for sale with realtors that just sat and sat and sat on the market. So I have a lot of, I'll call them sort of missing sales, sales that just never occurred. And they reflect a decline in demand in the market. Okay, so 7.1% decline from 18 to 19. 19 was my last full year of data. I'll give you an estimate for the first 2 quarters of 2020. But what you can see is 2015 was my peak, and land values have fallen off somewhat. They haven't cratered, okay? They haven't cratered. They have fallen off. They have softened. But given how, excuse my French, how crappy the profitability was, these have held up pretty well. And part of that, I think, is government payments. And part of that is low interest rates. Okay? These are things that are supporting the price of land. But remember, yes, sir? You guys are just on top of it. I was just about to say that Farmers are still my vast majority of buyers, okay? About 80% of ag land still goes to farmers. So do you have some support from those non-ag buyers? Yes, to a certain extent. We had a lot of people who wanted to get into the ag land market, and when I say people, a couple of different things come to mind. One is the local dentist or doctor, right, who is looking for another alternative, but they're local. They probably know the landlord that's selling that ground, so they're aware that the auction is happening. A lot of those auctions were local, and they were advertised locally. So I live in Wamego. Am I even going to know a piece of ground is for sale in Finney County or Ford County? I may not. I have to do a lot of research to kind of make sure I'm up on that market. So I don't think at this point in time, agriculture is not looking quite as attractive. And so there's not as much interest in it as there was, say, 8 years ago. This is pasture land, and it's basically following the same pattern, okay? So we're down a little bit, but not too bad. Here's what I have for when I take the raw data and I look at the first 2 quarters of 2020, I see that it's just fallen down $40 an acre on my raw data, which I'm gonna call flat. I'm gonna say COVID did not materially affect land values. There was some concern that it would. Why was there concern that it would? So let's go back to how land is sold. We sell quite a bit of land through auctions, okay? COVID happens. What happens to local auctions? Who attends local auctions? Local farmers and local landowners. The average age of a Kansas landowner is 72 years. Are those folks going out even for a free donut? No, not like they used to. So what's happening is a lot of the auction companies, especially the online auction companies, are coming in and saying, hey, we will advertise your land online. And we will expand the bidder base because we know that your local bidder base is declined because of COVID. And so I've talked to a couple different auction companies based here in Kansas that do online auctions, and they're doing quite well. But they're bringing in bidders from Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Georgia. Okay, so just as many bidders as they used to have, but a different mix. This is Iowa versus Kansas agricultural land values. Now here's the story I like to tell. How did your great-great-great-grandfather make it to Dodge City? Mode of transportation, yeah. Covered wagon, okay. Should they have, when they got to Missouri, taken a hard right? Look at those land values in Iowa. Yeah, they should have. Okay. Iowa and Kansas are both driven by agriculture. I don't want to imply that this table over here is the only one that knows history, right? If I adjust the axis so that my Kansas land values are on an axis so that you can kind of see the pattern now, you can see the trends, they're very similar, right? Agriculture in Iowa, granted, their land values are significantly higher than ours. Why is that? Well, because it rains there. It rains consistently there, and they have really good soils. But the pattern is interesting in that it is similar. Now, I want to step you through history here. Starting in 1960 through about 1972, the rate of growth of land values was very low and slow, a couple of percentage points a year, okay? Starting in 1975, commodity prices were really good, and farming was very lucrative, and land values responded, and they started going up, reflecting a really strong period in agriculture. Then in about 1982, interest rates were what? My folks had an operating note with an interest rate of 18%. Say that again? Yeah. So you're spending 18% interest on something. If the interest rate goes up by even a point, that's really expensive. That's really expensive money. And then we have some international issues, the Russian grain embargo. We have a couple of things happen, and basically the ag industry sees some really tough times, and we lose 50% of our land values by the end of the 80s. 50%. And then we go back on this low and slow rate of growth again. And we're pretty normal. And then you get into about 2005 and things start to pick up. And by 2008, we are taking off like a rocket. So here we are in the situation where government payments are keeping us from experiencing the full brunt of the ag market. What's going to happen to values over the next couple of years? That's a tough question. I don't necessarily know. I know there's been a lot of resiliency in the land market given where commodity prices have been. But interest rates are scheduled to remain low through 2023, according to the Fed. That's going to help us. MFP made a big difference. One of the comments that was made is, do you use your government payments to buy land? Well, if during that period of high profitability you weren't growing, you weren't trying to take on more land when it was really expensive, you probably have a lot of cash on hand. And in talking to some bankers, they say the buyers right now of ag land are buying with cash. And where are they getting that cash? From those good years. And maybe from some of their government payments. And I've already talked about the election. If you're interested in land value estimates, we have them on agmanager.info, which is a website that we keep. We have a lot of other agricultural information there as well. But I'd be happy to take any questions, although I think I'm over time. I apologize. But thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're just going to go right into the next presentation instead of taking a break. If you need to go to the bathroom, you can just step out real quick. It'll take them a second to set up anyway. So, and he's going to set up his own personal microphone and recording. So,
Thanks. Yeah.
I'm going to repeat it to them. For those of you are online, we weren't really going to take a break, but we have several people going to the bathroom. So we're going to be right back in 2 minutes as Stan sets up a few things, and then we'll be ready to go. So in 2 more minutes, we'll be ready to go.
not flavored. Although some people have suggested you should take that to help.
That suggestion was made.
I am ready whenever you want.
We got outvoted, clearly.
No, well, you know, there is a time that people need to have to stretch your legs and other things, so that's okay. So, Mykel, you were talking about ag values for taxation purposes, and there's actually a saying that the real estate developers in Wichita, I know, say that if you're going to develop land in Wichita, you better buy a plow. And it's because, for those of you who don't know, you will have parcels of ground in Wichita that will be in the middle of the urban area, and every year somebody comes and plows it and plants it and then turns it over. And why are they doing it? Because they want to keep it as an ag land use so that it's taxed on its use value, not on its market value. And so that's very common for... Oh, yeah. And it is because they intend to sell that land as a for-profit enterprise eventually, to be able to help cover some of the expenses of building the church and so forth. Yeah, it's ag land in Sedgwick County is a very different beast than it is out here. Probably should, because even if it is truly a transaction between a farmer to another farmer with intent, also heavily affected by that development potential. And that's got to be even more true as you get close to the Kansas City metro. Mm-hmm.
So I'll give a quick introduction for Dan Longhofer. He comes from the Institute for Real Estate at Wichita State University. I will say I'm happy to be my partner in crime all these years now coming out here. He's been very dedicated every single time coming out talking about it. He's got a great website and great data. It's always insightful. We all have houses or renting, so it involves all of us. So it's always intriguing to hear what you have to say. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. That's very kind of you. I have really enjoyed the opportunity to come out and to engage the different parts of the state. And it's one of the brainchilds that Jeremy had was these regional economic outlook conferences. And I'm so glad to see that they've been so successful. We miss those of you who are not with us in person. We miss you. And we'll look forward to seeing you all back here in this room next year, because it really is great to have this dialogue and have this discussion. And so, as Jeremy said, I am here to present. Every year we do an annual housing forecast for the state of Kansas. We forecast the state as a whole and the large metropolitan areas across the state. But in addition to the formal forecasts, which you can find copies of those forecast publications at the back table here, you also have at your place a copy of the Ford County Housing Outlook. And we prepare these smaller publications for 22 different counties across the state, essentially all of the micropolitan areas like Ford County. And so we hope you find that useful and the information in it valuable for you. And we have to give a special thanks to Security First Title in Wichita. They have offices here in Dodge City, over in Garden City as well. They've been friends of the Center for Real Estate for a long time, and their donation is what makes it possible for us to prepare these printed publications, make them available for you. So we're very grateful to them. We're also grateful to the Kansas Association of Realtors and all of the realtor boards across the state. And that would include the Dodge City Board of Realtors, the Great Plains Board of Realtors, the Southwest Kansas Association of Realtors down in Liberal, all of the realtors across the state. We have a contract with the Kansas Association of Realtors whereby we access multiple listing service data for every single MLS system across the state. We are then able to compile them to create definitive statewide MLS statistics, which is released every month by the Kansas Association of Realtors. And then we also prepare monthly statistical reports for all of the local boards. And so the data that you see in this county outlook comes from that partnership. And if you contact the Dodge City Board of Realtors, they can give you more details on a monthly basis of what's going on in your local market. So I'd encourage you to reach out to them. And again, we're grateful for that partnership. If it weren't for that agreement that we have, we wouldn't have access to the data that we need in order to do this forecast. So every year when I start my housing forecast, I always look at two fundamentals, the labor market and the mortgage market. I ask, do people have jobs and are they confident in their employment situation so that they'll be interested in buying a home? And then can they get the financing that they need in order to be able to finance that purchase? And this is a slide from my presentation last year. And I said, the fundamentals are really very solid. Mortgage financing is cheap and widely available, and labor markets are fairly healthy. And so I said, this is really a very solid situation. But I added a little caveat at the end. I said, somehow it feels like maybe there's something hovering all over our shoulders, and that somehow all of this could change very quickly. Maybe that's just the innate Great Plains, a certain pessimism of, you know, there's another drought coming at some point, or something bad will have to happen. I had no idea what was going to happen. No clue whatsoever about how bad, how quickly things could get in terms of our economic situation. Jeremy, I think, said earlier today that no one, when you were asked last year, what could be the trigger of the next recession? Absolutely none of us said that it would be a pandemic, right? That was just the furthest thing from our imagination. And so to summarize the the labor market side of things, Jeremy, I'm not going to include any slides on that. Jeremy talked about the employment forecast. Right now, if you looked at the housing market, you would not know that we're in the middle of a recession, okay? You just has not shown up at all. Housing markets have been essentially unaffected thus far, at least in terms of demand for home purchases. But my concern is that as Jeremy talked, he said, you know, early on, the sectors that have been impacted most heavily by the job losses have been in like leisure and hospitality, and in service sector jobs that are lower skilled jobs. And that as we've moved forward, we've seen a little bit more filtering of that into higher wage jobs and into other sectors. He's also expressed some real concerns about the long-term structural issues in the manufacturing sectors. And my concern is that we haven't really felt the impact of the labor market stress in the housing market yet, but that will come forward as we go into next year and the following year. So I'll talk about that when I get to my forecast, but I wanted to give that brief overview before we move forward. The second fundamental is the mortgage market and what's happening with mortgage rates. And although we've seen some reports over the last few months of underwriting standards getting a little bit tighter, it hasn't been significant. And in contrast, you know, a year ago at this conference, I said, there's no way rates are getting any lower. We don't think they're going to go up, but there's no way they're getting lower. And of course, as soon as I make a definitive statement, the economic gods play havoc on it, and they come and tell you, no, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. As if anybody needed to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. And so mortgage rates have dropped over the course of this year pretty dramatically. The one thing that I want to highlight on here is that the reason that rates have dropped over the course of this pandemic has been because the Federal Reserve has begun renewing its purchasing activity of mortgage-backed securities. And one of the things you'll notice here on this slide, you can kind of see my little dots that are going up here. The blue line at the bottom here is the 5/1 adjustable mortgage rate. That's a loan that has an interest rate that's fixed for 5 years, and then after that it adjusts annually. And that interest rate is typically lower than the 30-year fixed mortgage rate because lenders don't bear as much interest rate risk. The loan is only fixed for 5 years. After that, as market rates move, the rate on that loan adjusts, okay? Normally, we see that a spread between the 30-year fixed rate and the 5/1 adjustable. But over the past 6 months or so, we've seen that spread drop to essentially zero. And again, that is reflecting the fact that where the Fed has been purchasing has been those long-term fixed rate mortgages. So we've been driving down those interest rates much more aggressively than we've been driving down shorter term interest rates. So I said the labor market hasn't been affecting things very much. So we're really seeing strong demand from the labor market side of things, and then mortgage rates have gotten very inexpensive. And so both of those continue to stimulate demand in the housing market. At the same time, what we're seeing is that sales activity has essentially plateaued. And so the blue bars on this chart represent monthly home sales reported by all of the MLS systems across Kansas. And then the orange line is the moving average of those sales. And so it allows us to get through the seasonality where we see sales go up in the spring and they tail off in the fall. And again, we had some fairly healthy, slow but steady increases in home sales activity. And then over the last 2 years, 3 years or so, we've essentially plateaued without much increase, without any decreasing. And the reason for that is because of tight inventories. And I'm going to show that here in a minute. But before I do, I wanted to say what's been happening with the Dodge City area. So once again, these are the sales as reported by the Dodge City Board of Realtors. The bars represent monthly sales. Somebody was concerned earlier that it was annual sales. No, they're monthly sales. And then the orange line is the moving average of those. And you can see that over the 2019, we had kind of a nice little increase in home sales activity. And we've sort of averaged out at around 22, 23 sales per month on average. Again, there's seasonality in here, so it moves around quite a bit. But a highest level of sales activity in the Dodge City area that we've seen in recent history, at least. So I said that sales have plateaued statewide. But why, if I said the labor markets haven't really shown any impact on the housing market, and mortgage rates are low, we have really strong demand, why aren't we seeing home sales activity take off more? And the reason is because our inventories of the supply of homes available for sale is incredibly tight. And so we measure this, it's a measure of balance in the housing market with a number that we call months supply. And to do this, we take the number of homes that are available for sale, active listings, and divide it by the average pace of sales over the past year. And so, for example, if there are 1,000 homes available for sale on the market, and we sell on average 200 homes a month, then we would say 1,000 divided by 200, we have a 5-month supply of homes available on the market. And generally, we think that a balanced market is a market in which we have between a 4 and a 6-month supply of homes available. That provides enough inventory for there to be the regular churning, for you to be able to sell your house, find another house, move, and facilitate that turnover in the housing market. Above a 6-month supply, and we tend to think it leans a little bit more towards being a buyer's market, where there's going to be some downward pressure on home prices and more competition among sellers to try and find somebody to buy their home. Below a 4-month supply, we begin to say that it looks more like a seller's market. And what you can see from this chart, the yellow line is the state of Kansas. And you can see that ever since 2015, we've dropped down below that 4-month supply threshold. And indeed, recently here this year, we've now dropped down below a 2-month supply. These are incredibly tight inventories. Indeed, in some markets in the state, we have less than a 1-month supply of homes available for sale right now. There was somebody who was sitting, was it you that told the story of your son who sold a house in Wichita? You want to say that again for everybody, what happened to him just a month or two ago? Put it on the market on a Friday afternoon. Within 4 hours, he had 8 offers. My guess is that many of them were above the asking price, and that deal closed and sold very, very quickly. That's not an anomaly right now in many parts of the state. We're seeing that in Dodge City as well, is what one of the other comments. And in Finney County over in Garden. It's really tight inventories. And so one of the things that's interesting here, you'll notice the orange line on this chart is the Dodge City MLS number. And where it bounces, it's a little more volatile, it bounces around a little bit more in terms of the month's supply. But you can see there as well that over the past year, there's been a sharp decrease in month's supply in this area. And again, that's been true across many parts of the state where inventories have gotten much tighter. The last thing I wanted to highlight on this chart is you'll notice that the blue line is Kansas. And you will see that in March, April, May kind of area, right during the period of the shutdown, there was a really sharp increase in month's supply nationwide. And that's because unlike Kansas, in many parts of the country, real estate activities were not deemed essential activities. But when the shutdowns began to occur and we're trying to decide which activities need to stay open because they're really essential, Governor Kelly, wisely in my view, stated that real estate activities are an essential activity. And that's not necessarily that it's absolutely essential. Well, if you're actually in a situation where you need to sell your home, you've lost your job or something else has happened and you need to sell, not having access to the services of a realtor could really compound your problems. But the other piece of it is that real estate activities are not likely to be activities in the midst of a pandemic that are super spreaders, right? We have ways to do virtual home tours. We have ways to separate people while they're going through this home buying and home selling process, that it's not like we're creating a mass of bodies of people all together in one tight location. And so as a result, we in Kansas did not see a spike in month's supply during the shutdowns in any measure the way that the U.S. as a whole did. Now, one of the things that has been true always in real estate markets is that when I come in and I talk about real estate markets, I do this 40,000-foot flyover. And I talk a lot about averages. Mykel would say the same thing about ag values as well. You know, nobody owns the average Dodge City home. No one owns the average Garden City home. We all own a home in a neighborhood, in a particular location within that neighborhood. And so there are submarkets in real estate that matter. And one way that I try and get at some differences that may be happening across submarkets is by looking at different price ranges. And so I picked some arbitrary price ranges. I tried to say, what's the lower end of the market? What's the kind of meat of the market, the most popular price ranges? What's the upper middle of the market? And then the high end. And for Dodge City, kind of looking at just the pattern and history of home sales activity and price in different price ranges over the past 5 years or so, I picked price points of $100,000, $175,000, and $250,000. So below $100,000 is the lower end of the market. Between $100,000 and $175,000, that's really the most, the highest volume transactions that happen in that price range. But the next price range is also pretty popular, $175,000 to $250,000. Above 250, you start to see the number of transactions tail off pretty dramatically. And so I called that the upper end of the market. And then I segmented and I calculated the month's supply based on these price ranges. And you could debate what's the right cut points, right? I thought about using a $300,000 cut point, but the orange line, the yellow line on this just got way out of proportion. I couldn't read anything from it. But what you'll notice here, I think, are two things that are interesting. Number one is that the low end of the market, homes priced between $100,000, below $100,000, have actually been pretty flush over a number of years. Okay, there's actually been sort of an excess supply of these homes for a considerable period of time. In contrast, this $100,000 to $175,000 price range has been sitting at the low end of a balanced market for an extended period of time. Yes. Yes, so the question is, are these sales MLS listings, or do they reflect things that are outside the MLS? Is that really where your question comes from? These sales are only sales that are reported through a multiple listing service. Sure. So for the people who are remote, two issues that were raised here by people in the audience. Number one is that that we have a lot of sales that are not being reported through the MLS, and particularly we see that with new home construction, and then a statement that you believe there's been an increase in for sale by owner activity here lately. Okay. No, I believe you with that. I will say generally when I've looked at this in the past, and I've not looked Ford County specifically, and because I've been concerned, real estate MLS systems only reflect homes that have been sold using a licensed real estate agent. And you don't have to do that. You can do a for sale by owner. The for sale by owner may or may not end up getting input in the MLS system. Sometimes appraisers come back and input them into the system to use for comps. Okay. Your appraisers don't have access to the MLS to do that? Okay. Right, and so the comment there was about whether or not title companies will facilitate and handle, writing up the contract and doing the closing of a for sale by owner deal that doesn't have a realtor on either end of the transaction, the buyer or the seller. What I started to say is that when I've looked at it in the past in other parts of the state, and I have not looked at Ford County specifically, compare sales validation questionnaires that are filed. So that is every time a parcel sells, you need to report that to the county appraiser's office. Essentially, they use that to help validate the data that they use to estimate market values for appraisal for tax purposes. And that reflects every transaction that occurs, but it could be a single family home sale, it could be a vacant land sale, it could be even a small little sliver of land sold by neighboring parcels and so forth. What we found is that what we've not seen is a significant divergence between the number of sales validation questionnaires filed and MLS activity. So that when MLS home sales go up, we see almost a lockstep increase with sales validation questionnaires being filed and so forth. That's not a perfect measure, but it indicates to me that it's unlikely. So one of the questions that was being raised here was, could we be seeing in this time when inventories are so tight that we're seeing a lot more for sale by owners, and therefore this is underrepresenting the actual number of transactions that are happening? I know that that's not the case in Sedgwick County because I see those sales validation questionnaires every single month. I cannot speak directly to Ford County because I don't see that. So as I usually defer to the local experts when it comes to those kind of questions. And so that may underrepresent what's really happening in terms of the sales activity in this county. Let me think. Oh, so the other thing that I wanted to point out here, which I do think is interesting, and I think it ties with what you were saying here, is that yellow line is the upper end of the market. And again, it's an arbitrary point of list price greater than $250,000. And what we've seen here is a pretty steep decline in those inventories over the past year. And I think what we're seeing in terms of housing markets is twofold things. Number one is the households that are most likely to be home buyers are the least likely to have been detrimentally impacted by the labor market stress. They are more likely to have jobs that are capable of operating remotely or doing something else to be able to maintain that. And so the housing, the demand among people who might be home buyers hasn't been affected as much as other segments of the economy have been affected. Number two, the low interest rates that we're seeing right now, I really think are causing people to stretch. And you mentioned about new home construction not showing up in here. And that's actually true all over the state, you know, that if you look at the number of building permits and you look at the number of new home sales in the MLS, you'd think that we were just way, way overbuilding. But it's because many, many new home sales are never input into the MLS. And and what we're seeing is an awful lot, when I talk about the construction side of things, we're seeing people stretch and we're saying, hey, if I can lock in these low interest rates and get my dream home, whether it's an existing home that's more expensive and in a better neighborhood than I thought I could, or whether it is to build a new home, I want to do that right now while I can take advantage of this situation. And again, if I'm not being impacted by the layoffs and so forth, I'm able to do that. So our home sales forecast for the state of Kansas, we're forecasting across the state, home sales will be up, but just slightly this year, about a 1% increase in home sales. And that increase would be much greater if it weren't for the fact that inventories are so tight. There simply aren't enough homes available, especially in the price points that people want. But as I said, inventories have gotten much tighter even at the upper end of the market, and that's true across most markets in the state. Next year, we're forecasting a modest decline, 1.3% decline in home sales. That's reflecting two things. Number one, inventories will still continue to be very tight. And number two, I believe that we're going to see the impact of the recession spread and impact broader segments of the economy, more likely to be home buyers. And so demand for home sales will taper off a little bit next year. But when I say that demand will be slightly lower next year, I don't mean that we're going to all of a sudden flip into a buyer's market. Inventories are so tight right now that even if we have demand drop off, we might go from where we're at a 2-month supply right now to a 3 to 4 month supply, and that's still a tight inventory. And so home sales will be down slightly next year, but that's not going to necessarily mean that we're creating any cratering in the housing market. So if you think about the stories that we've been talking about here, we have demand that continues to be very strong and really tight inventories, and so you'd expect home prices would be going up. And in fact, that's what we've seen across the state. This is the year-over-year change in the Federal Housing Finance Agency's home price index for US, for Kansas, and then I have this rural Kansas counties. Rural Kansas counties, again, I don't think of Garden City or of Dodge City as being rural areas. You're small cities. But by this definition, what it means is any county in the state of Kansas that's not a part of one of the 5 metropolitan areas. So if you're outside of a metropolitan area, outside of the counties that are part of Kansas City, Lawrence, Manhattan, Topeka, or Wichita, other than that, this is all the other counties, and all of western Kansas would be included in this. Lots of differences across the state. You have different experiences than southeast Kansas, than north central Kansas. But what we've seen here for the state as a whole, home prices on average have been bouncing around appreciation rates of about 5% for about 5 years now. And that's really strong appreciation for Kansas, much stronger than is typical. Really close to on par with the US as a whole, which is unusual. What's even more unusual is that what we've seen here in the last year or so is more typically The non-metropolitan parts of the state appreciate slower than the state as a whole, 2.5% per year. Would be a much more typical home price appreciation. But over the last year or so, we've seen that increase where it's really on par with the state as a whole and with the US. And so much stronger appreciation in these non-metropolitan areas. We don't have a specific home price index for Ford County, but what we do have is the median sale price. And the median sale price is the price at which half of the homes sold for more and half of the homes sold for less. And over a long period of time, that can reflect underlying appreciation. Although the other thing it can reflect is a change in what price segment of homes are buying. And so you can see here that upwards close to $150,000 in the Dodge City area. And again, that's reflecting two things. Number one, underlying home price appreciation and a move towards higher end, more expensive homes. So both of those are in play there. Our forecast for the state as a whole is that home prices will increase by about 4.8% this year, followed by another 5.7% next year. That really strong numbers are being driven primarily in the Kansas City and Wichita areas for next year. Matter of fact, our forecast is that Wichita will have the strongest home price appreciation in the state next year. And the final number that we forecast for the state as a whole is new home construction activity. And for a lot of years, new home construction was just kind of flat. If you took out Kansas City in particular, you would just see new home construction activity was just not doing much. For instance, in Wichita, we've been sitting at around 1,000 permits per year for about the last 8 years, just not really increasing. And you might ask, why is that happening? If you've got strong demand and you've got tight inventories, why aren't more builders building homes, filling that void and helping to increase those inventories? And the answer to that is because this chart doesn't go back quite far enough to really show it. You know, from 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, we had a number of years in Kansas where home price appreciation, it didn't crater. We didn't have sharp declines the way that we did for the US as a whole. But we bounced around zero for a lot of years. And during all that time, when existing home prices were not appreciating, we had new construction costs continued to go up. Materials got more expensive. Labor became tighter and tighter supply. And so construction got more and more expensive relative to what existing homes were. And it made it not a very good value proposition to build a new home. In essence, the people who were building new homes were people who wanted what they wanted, they could afford it, and they didn't care if they could buy more value for their money elsewhere. Well, we're finally starting to see that logjam being broken. And so as a result, we're forecasting new building permits to increase 12% this year and another 21% next year. And again, that you see that especially in the larger metropolitan areas. But across the state, we're seeing situations where with the low interest rates and more buyers kind of interested in new home construction than have been interested in the past, coupled with existing home prices going up, it's made it easier for new homes to compete. And therefore, we're finally seeing some increases in construction. And I think I'm probably way out of time. And so I will finish that. And then I'm happy to take questions afterwards if we have some time at the very end. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. And you all have a great day.
Thank you. I'll let you hand it off in the microphone. Just as an introduction, although hard introducing here locally, Nick Hernandez is the for here. I will say with all the questions he's had, Nick Hernandez deserves up here with us. He's been very engaged in data all morning. So, he's clearly comfortable with it. I appreciate your willingness to talk about the local economy.
Like I said, I think I know everyone pretty much here. Name's Nick Hernandez. Hernandez, city manager in Dodge City. I'm only given 10 minutes to speak. Everyone else got 30 minutes, and I could probably speak for 2 hours. But just a really quick update on how COVID's kind of affected the city of Dodge City. We still are up with sales tax year over year, 1.2%. And we also, when we first started talking about this, we anticipated a 25% reduction in sales tax. So that 1.2% is really a good thing for us. One of the downsides we have seen, though, is enrollment is down about 200 actual students. And the reason for that is because most of those are pre-K. Individuals are just not willing to have their younger kid be enrolled in a pre-K program. They'd much rather keep them at home for another year. And that accounts for almost 100 of those students. The other ones are homeschooled students. They just are completely out of the system. And honestly, that's really going to affect them next year because they'll probably end up going back to school next year. And so the numbers really are up for the district overwide, but when you take those two into account, that's actually a little bit lower enrollment. We've had some businesses here close in town, but a lot of our stores and retailers are having record years. You know, especially the home improvement, a lot of the appliance are having really good years. Car sales are really up, which is kind of surprising for a lot of areas. We've sold a lot of vehicles here in town because our economy is largely made up of essential employees. And what we've seen with our packing houses, a lot of those individual packing houses have had $2 increase per hour initially, but they've made that a permanent increase here locally. So you're talking about $18 an hour just starting. Starting salary, no experience, $18 an hour. And they're getting up to, you know, you've been there a couple years, you're going to be making $25 an hour plus overtime. And they're also they were getting bonuses of up to $600 a week during the whole COVID thing. So they were making really, really good money while a lot of other places were struggling. Also, our unemployment is up to 4.2%, but it's lower than the state average. We've talked a little bit about that earlier in different presentations. Back in March, we had 2.1%, which is basically no unemployment. I mean, really, anything below 3 is pretty much, there's absolutely, everyone who wants a job has a job. We're back up to about 4.2%. A lot of that's due to our service industries. Our restaurants just don't have the individuals working on the inside because a lot of them are just drive-through businesses now. And so that's where really that change comes into play. This has been a huge benefit for us as the Rural Housing Incentive District here in Dodge City. Since 2011, we've had over 500 housing units that have been built utilizing the Rural Housing Incentive District. Was it just off?
We may have pressed it. Oh, yeah, we'll take it off.
Trying to hurry here, you know. Okay, well, you have questions for everyone, of course. Casa del Rio says 20 units, but it's actually 120 units, I believe, is how many is in this development. So this is just phase one. And we should be starting that here probably in the next couple months, which we're very excited about. But this doesn't even take in consideration all the other single family homes that we have being built outside of those RHIDs. And so we're really, really excited to see our housing market here in town. Commercial construction permits. When I talk about these are new commercial construction businesses. These are not existing remodels. These are actually new commercial businesses coming into Dodge City and being constructed. And so we're pretty flat, you know, anywhere from 8 to 10 a year. But we do have large businesses coming in and doing big remodels like National Beef. You know, they can do anywhere from $20 to $80 million worth of remodel a year. So that's not included in here. Some of our current developments, NORAM just got completed and had their open house just recently. It's 148,000 square foot cold storage facility. Has about $35 million price tag. We'll employ 90 employees when it's fully built out, but we're currently at 60 employees, which is great for the city. One of the things that is often overlooked is the contribution of wind farms to Ford County. It has a huge impact to the economy here in Ford County. We currently have over 880 megawatts of generation in Ford County from the wind farms. We have 2 more wind farms in development, Iron Star and Pioneer Creek, both of them which are south of town here, which will be great. They're going to add an additional 350 megawatts of energy. And so what has that meant to the economy here in Ford County? For just the 880 megawatts, the existing actual wind farms, we anticipate that is going to generate $129 million in revenue for lease payments and land payments just to those property owners that currently have turbines on their property. That doesn't take into consideration the 2 wind farms that are in development. And so that's a huge impact. This then also has nothing to do with taxes, property taxes, payment in lieu of taxes. Those are all in excess of that $129 million. And so that's a huge impact for our county. There are also ITC of Great Plains is basically our transmission system here in Ford County. And they're actually working on the Saddle Road substation. And this is actually going to be give them the ability to connect the Iron Star wind farm to their big power line. But I'd won 10 minutes was all I was given, so that's all I have. Any questions for me? No? See? All right. I think it is solving our housing problem here in town. I think there's still housing for the very, very low level entry individuals. But what we're seeing is that natural progression. You know, you build a mid-level type home anywhere from $160,000 to $250,000 home, and our businesses and most of those families have at least 2 individuals that are working full time, and so they can afford it, and they know there's stability in their position. Because they're constantly hiring new individuals, they're constantly getting promoted, and so they know their stability, so they take the risk to go into a little bit nicer home. So then that frees up the lower level houses and then frees up apartments because those individuals from apartments move into the lower level houses and so on and so forth. So it's done really well for us. I think our biggest challenge is just trying to make sure that we continue building, you know, at a fairly good pace. I don't see our housing market changing much, probably for the next 2 or 3 years.
being removed from the?
Some of it's being renovated, some of it's being removed. We do have several different housing programs. Actually, Molly here is with the Ford County Economic Development Group, and she's kind of the lead for handling a lot of these housing programs here in Dodge City and Ford County. And so we have individuals that are going in remodeling homes that are junk. We're bringing homes in from outside of the area and remodeling and bringing them up to where they need to be. But we have a lot of different housing programs here in Dodge City. And so that is just propping up our overall inventory. And some of the good things that we've seen, we bring houses into kind of a more economically depressed area. What we find is the neighbors around there will start fixing their houses up and will start cleaning up their properties. But we also give them the ability, and we help them with funds to help clean up their property, help paint. And so that just kind of builds more pride in that area. And it's been very successful for us. So I'm very optimistic. About Dodge City and Ford County, and actually all of Southwest Kansas. I think we have a lot of really good things coming. I think that COVID has just been a kind of a blip for us. I just think it's going to be one of those things that we're going to power through it, and we're going to be better off in the long run. Okay. Thank you.
And you did a great job. All the great detailed data, just like we all had this morning.
We have a few minutes. Are there questions for Mykel or Stan? There, and Andrea, she's out there. If someone, where do we put it?
If someone online has a question, they can type it in the chat box, and we can relay that through Andrea. She can put it on her text and send it to me. Well, so far I don't see any questions. Any other comments? Well, I will say thank you very much for letting us come out here again. I love coming out to this area. I want to thank our sponsors like Evergy and Henry Helgerson and even the Kansas Health Foundations and NAI Martins, who all have given us a lot of sponsorships to be able to come out here. We definitely want to keep coming in the future. If you have any questions in the meantime, you're welcome to reach out to me between now and next year. Send me an email if you have a question. I know some people have emailed me already or called me, so you're welcome to do that at any time. And I'm sure the other speakers here too are always open to help answering questions. If you have any insight between now and then, so let's say you knew COVID was happening, you need to tell me what the next turn is. So it comes from the wisdom from the crowd. So if there's another big turn, let me know what that might be. I still don't see any questions. So with that, I'm going to conclude this event. So thank you very much and have a good day. You can leave your name tags on the tables and we can pick them up so we can recycle them. Everyone online, thank you very much. You have a good day.
Okay, thank you. I will take a whole bunch. I'll just take one for them.